So, getting into the FNA, some things that we kind of need to talk about just to set some precedents, obviously. But it's definitely important for you to understand these things and get some good knowledge and understanding of how to gather a good FNA, to be able to be professional in what we do. Obviously, that's extremely important. However, building a huge organization and having massive recruiting will help you develop this skill much faster than trying to sit down and just learn it by reading stuff and trying to figure it out that way. If you guys were in training yesterday, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's fairly boring. It's much more interesting when you get a case and you get an FNA, and then you have to come back and go, man, I don't know what to do here. This guy is saying he wants to save $50,000 a year. I'm not really sure what to recommend. This is where their assets are at. He has a bunch of savings. He's investing in these things. What should we be looking at for this person? And even I just did that the other day. We were talking to a couple married with kids. They're making very, very good money, more money than they're allowed to use a lot of programs. And they're trying to figure out what they're going to do to save a bunch of this money. They've got about $1.5 million that they want to roll over. They also want to look at maybe doing some IULs because they've got about $1 million in some CDs sitting around. So they want to be able to get a better rate of return. So I was like, okay, well, this seems a little bit, I just want to ask some questions. So I called up Sean Villalobos and I was like, hey, can you kind of run through this with me? And he's like, oh, I would do this. I do a couple IULs here. I would just move that into, some indexed annuities. I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I would have done. He's like, yeah, okay, well, like just because there's an extra zero or two doesn't make a difference in anything that we do, right? Like the products and services are great regardless of how much money they have, but that comes through building an organization. So I don't want that to be lost in translation, obviously, because that's going to bring you a lot more assets versus just going out and trying to find that. And what I mean by that is a lot of, I would say, to give you a good number, probably 80 to 90% of the business that's done through WFG especially through Revolution, is done through internal consumption. And so what that means is they're a recruit and we're doing a piece of business. So most of what you're going to find is also through the recruiting process. And I think that that's why it's so important, because you're finding clients also through the recruiting process. So you get to double dip on that. So I always recommend that being the go-to. Ask them for the recruit and fall back on them being a client if they don't want to do the recruit side. Now, obviously, you don't have to recruit them for them to become a client. That's silly. We had somebody from another organization that we heard some stuff about, and they were like, oh, I just wanted to become a client, but they said I had to recruit first. No, obviously, they don't have to do that. Don't lose the sale because they don't want to recruit, but definitely ask for that first, because I would much rather recruit somebody and open up 100 more sales than just getting a sale. Does that kind of make sense? Like, could you imagine if the person had not recruited Sean and Jamie Villalobos and they had just sold them a $200 a month IUL at the time, right? Like, they would have lost out on millions and millions of dollars at a huge organization because they were just going for the sale. So I always recommend having that discussion first, okay? And I hope that you're going to take notes and you're going to learn this from the aspect of wanting to teach it in the future, right? So I think we listen differently. I think we have a different intent. When my thought process is, I want to be able to teach this to future generations so that way when I recruit somebody, I'm not just good at it, but I also have a process to be able to teach them on how exactly to be able to do that. And that's why we're getting into a lot of these video series where we're going to have this stuff saved, where somebody can come in and literally learn this right off the bat at their own convenience. So I wanted to keep those in mind as we get into this. Okay, so the process of gathering an FNA, it's kind of broken down into 4 parts. This is really what we're going to work on. So obviously we have to do a one-on-one. There's got to be a great edification. There's got to be a presentation that happens. And through that process, we're selling the FNA. So it's not something that we just walk into. I want you to understand that it's a process, that we've got to set these things up appropriately to have the chance to do a financial needs analysis. The second part of that is doing the first. Oftentimes, the first appointment can be tied into the one-on-one. The one-on-one is going to be the first time that we're sitting down with somebody. It's kind of more focused on a recruiting presentation, but we do the recruiting and the client presentation at the same time. So a lot of times that flip chart that has the rate of return, the taxes, that stuff on it, that is considered the first, okay? And so in the first, we're reselling the FNA and the importance of them to be able to do that. We're going to gather the FNA, and then we're going to sell the second appointment. The reason why I'm saying sell the second appointment is because there's some very specific language that we can use that will bring up your ratios as far as your next appointments. And these are things that I've really had to learn through trial and error. And it's so simple how a simple text message or a simple phone call setting up the next appointment makes a world of difference, like going from maybe a 30 or 40% show ratio to the 80 or 90% ratio just by being very specific on some of these things. The third one is the research. How do we input an FNA? How do we actually put that into the system? Some of you guys aren't going to be able to play with this yet because you're not licensed. Once you're licensed and you have access to MyWFG, you'll be able to get in there and actually do an FNA, but I'll show you what it looks like after we print that out. Obviously, how to have that conversation with an SMD to really try and figure out what is going to be best for that client and what they should be doing, and to be able to come up with some good solutions for whatever it is that they have going on, okay? And then reminder for the second appointment, kind of, and we'll talk about this, there's a script for that as well, which I think is fantastic. And then the second appointment. The second appointment is when we go back on the client side. And we're going to recap what we gathered in the financial needs analysis, confirm some of the things that they said, make sure that we're still talking and that all of our research is going to actually continue. We're going to get commitments. Then the commitments being actually filling out the paperwork and getting all that stuff done. And we're going to teach you this process from A to Z. So I'm assuming if, depending on how many questions and stuff we have, we might have to do a three Tuesday process for you to really get this down into details, because I want to go into detail and make sure you understand how to do this and how to do it very effectively, okay? And feel free to screenshot these or do whatever you need to do at that point, but I'll also put this video out so you can go back and rewatch it too. All right. So when we're doing the one-on-one, obviously, as we talked about, your ability to do a great edification or to teach the person that you're going in the field with, if you're taking a trainee out, making sure they understand how to do an edification. The edification really puts the person that we're talking to in the correct frame of mind. And it's amazing when you start learning about pre-framing, how using some words of what they're going to see before they see it allows that process to happen a lot more smoothly. And you can also tell them what that experience is going to be for them, which is very unique. So it's important to be able to do this properly. So I put an edification up here, just some things that basically you'd want to say, how you would want to say that. So if I was a trainee, I would be studying this. I would make sure I was very consistent on it. I would be recording myself. This is something that you're going to use for the rest of your career, both for yourself and then also as you're teaching your other guys. And so if you can regurgitate this or something very similar to it, it's a very effective way to edify somebody. Because what's happening, if you think about it, the psychology aspect of it, when we go in to run a presentation, everybody's kind of equal. Does that make sense? And what a lot of trainees end up doing on accident, if we don't teach them, is they will actually edify the people that we're sitting down with and not their trainer. And so if you think about that on a psychology level, if here's the trainer, here's the people that we're going into, that's called in the prospects, and now they're going to lift them up. Well, now the trainee has to do, or the trainer has to do all of this extra work, basically their whole presentation, just to get themselves level again, right? So it would be the same thing if I was introducing you to the janitor versus introducing you to Steve Jobs. Yes, I understand we should be treating everybody the same, but they're going to listen with different intent depending on where that person's status is and how you do that edification. And so the higher you can lift up your trainer, the more of that they're going to listen and the more things that are going to catch with them. Whereas if we do it this way and the prospects are way more important, they're way more edified than the trainer, they don't feel like they need to listen to anything. And so they're not going to be present through the presentation. So our likelihood of getting a financial needs analysis and actually helping them become a client is low because they're going to feel like they have so much more authority than the trainer does. Make sense? So get good at this and get good at just saying good things about people. I think it's a very, very important skill to have, and it really makes a big difference when you're running appointments. Okay, a great edification will do more for you than a great presentation, but go ahead and do both. Make sure they're both good. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. And so as we're continuing with this, we also, key points of the presentation. I don't want to do this because what we'll do is we'll do another high impact class, which will actually teach you the process of setting up the appointments and how to run the one-on-one, some of the commitments. We'll do some practice with each other. So we'll get you guys into that over the next couple of weeks. But I want you to have the main bullet points of what should happen in that one-on-one. So the first thing that we want to talk about is we want to remind them that we want referrals. We're gathering referrals, getting into the FNA, whatever it is that we want them to do, we want to talk about it multiple times before we get there. We want to pre-frame what we're going to be doing before we get there. That way it's not a surprise to them. So 3 sets of eyes, commit them for referrals. Very, very important. Here's another key for you. The more referrals you get up front, the more likely they are to do something, whether it's a recruit or become a client, because they obviously, so it's an easy test for you to find out if they're wanting to become a client, because if they believe in what you do and they found value in what they heard, you getting referrals then is them committing, like they have belief in what you do, and if they're willing to give you their friends and family, they're probably willing to let you help them as well. So it's an easy way to test if they're going to become a client or not. And also, the more referrals you get, the more likely it is for it to stay on the books, the more likely it is to be able to keep them as clients long term. And so we need to talk about that beginning, middle, and end. The presentation is really meant to disturb and intrigue. And if I think everybody here has seen a one-on-one. And if there was a good edification and the presentation was done and you ran 10 appointments, you got some kind of a result because the presentations are so good. They really do a great job at disturbing and intriguing the people and getting them to realize that they don't know everything and they can use some help, but also that the way that we're doing it is extremely effective and very efficient for them, and it doesn't cost them anything, right? So there's really nothing for them to lose to go through that process. So obviously sell the opportunity first, collect referrals on each side, and then if they don't want to become a recruit, when they don't want to become a recruit, then we're going to talk about the client side. So give them the opportunity to become a recruit first, because we'll get the client side through that as well as we help them through the fast start process. Because obviously, if they're working with us, it's probably a good idea if they have something of ours, if they're actually, because that's one of the things. I just ran an appointment the other day and they're like, okay, well, what do you have? Well, yeah, I have these things. I'm putting hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, into these same products and services that I'm recommending for you. So I'm obviously using them. I believe in them. That comes off with a lot of authority. The last thing you want to do is be running a presentation, go to gather an FNA or gather an FNA, and then the clients go, well, are you using these things? So you ran a one-on-one, you did the first, you're coming back for the second, and they're going, okay, well, now I'm getting to the recommendation, but, oh, you're not a client? Oh, okay, well, we need to think about it, is usually what they say at that point. And as a field trainer, you only need to go through that once before you say you're never going to do that again. Because that's a lot of work to get to for the trainee to not just be a client and have something, because they need to be doing a good job saving anyway. Could you imagine, like, our saying is no family left behind. Could you imagine if it was no family left behind except for all of our agents? they don't need to save or actually become financially independent. That would be kind of silly. So, and then sell the FNA. So through the one-on-one, we talk about there's no cost, and we're going to put this plan together that will accomplish whatever their goals and dreams are, whether it's getting them on track for retirement or sending their kids to schools or maybe getting them out of debt, or maybe they need some proper protection, whatever it might be, we'll help them with that, right? So multiple places we're going to be talking about the FNA. Then when we get into the client side on the first, we're talking about when we put this plan in place for you. And so using some of those words of when we put this plan in place for you, when we help you with this, we're setting that up for future reference, that once we get to that point, they feel like they're already there. They're already owning that process, okay? Any questions thus far? Pretty simple. Okay, good. All right, so now once we gather the FNA, okay, so sometimes you'll find what happens is, let's say we set up a one-on-one. So we're a field trainer, field trainee, and they're calling to do their first 10 appointments to get into Fast Start School, okay? And we set it up with husband and wife. They love everything that we're talking about, but because of the rapport building, because of running the presentation, because we're getting referrals, the appointment runs a little bit long. So what happens sometimes is we might have to schedule the first appointment. So we ran the one-on-one, we piqued their interest, they want to do an FNA, but maybe we're already an hour at this point and we're kind of running out of time. They need to go pick up the kids or whatever it might be. So now we're going to schedule the one-on-one for the next day or within the next 48 hours. So we've scheduled a one-on-one. Sometimes when we come back, now we've got to resell gathering the FNA. I'm going to run through the client side really fast just to give them a brief breakdown to make sure they remember what we talked about. And I'm going to resell that we're doing the FNA. The beautiful part about this is if you come back, you know for sure you're gathering an FNA, and most likely they want to be a client. Like if you get that first appointment, you're like 80 to 90% closing ratio if you're just not a knucklehead through this process, okay? Like you just keep walking to the next step. And then we're going to gather the FNA, and we're going to start gathering some information. So obviously when we're wrapping up, when I go back through the client side, or maybe we're going through the client side for the first time, I get to the bottom, and then I'm going to let them know that we're going to gather some information, and I'm just going to ask them and start filling out the paperwork. And I'm going to just assume, they call it an assumptive close. Basically, I'm just going into the FNA, and if they don't want to, they're going to stop me. Challenges, I think I've been stopped maybe once or twice in my career. Generally, it never happens, especially if all this stuff is done right. Ask some inspiring questions. Which are the 6 most important things to you? So I'm going to show you exactly how I do this, but these are some of the key questions that you can write down to make sure you have those. So these are the things that I ask through gathering the FNA. Which of these 6 are most important to you? Which are your top 2 or 3? Because we want to make sure that we're focusing on what's more important to them. I've seen a couple lost because they're worried about retirement and wills and trusts, and we come back and we're talking about debt and life insurance, right? It's like that's not what they wanted to talk about at all. So why did you bring that stuff up? Yes, we need to do that in the process, but let's focus on what's most important to them. How are you feeling you're doing in these areas? And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about in the financial needs analysis. Do you have any health issues? I think this is such a funny question because I've had so many people go, no, I'm perfectly healthy. And then I go, well, what medications are you on? They go, oh, I'm on this, and I'm on this, and I'm on that. I'm like, wait, you said you were healthy. Well, yeah, I'm healthy as long as I'm taking my medication. So make sure you ask them what medications you're on, because we could do a bunch of research just to find out they're taking some medication that automatically disqualifies them from the life insurance side. But yet we didn't ask that question. You came back and you started working with me. We went through this whole process. We were looking at an IUL. We go to submit everything and then find out there's some medications in the future. So as much of this work preemptively that you can do, the better. Anything in your medical history that they might find, any cancer, any strokes, any high blood pressure, any mental issues. Have you ever had anything with depression or anxiety? Depression and anxiety are the 2 biggest ones that are really going to put a damper on us being able to do any life insurance, because obviously they're afraid if somebody's having thoughts and want to do things to hurt themselves, and that obviously makes them liable. So they don't want to have that kind of stuff, right? So definitely important questions to ask. How much money do you feel you have left over at the end of the month? So sometimes I'll run an FNA. It looks like everything's great, but the numbers are coming out. They're spending exactly what is coming in because they overestimated on something. They're like, oh, I don't know, maybe $500 or $600 a month. Well, I would rather ask that question than tell them they have no discretionary, and then they go, oh yeah, well maybe we can't save anything. They're going to know better than the numbers that we actually put together on what actually feels realistic to them. How much of that would you like to save? Another great question. So we find out they have $500 or $600 or $1,000 discretionary. How much of that do you actually want to save? How much of that do you want going towards long term, right? So the more commitments we get, the easier it is to come back and have a great solution for them versus coming back on a second appointment and trying to figure all of these things out while we're trying to make a recommendation, but we don't know how much they want to save. We don't know if they can qualify for life insurance. That's not a good position to be in on a second appointment. How much do you need coming in a month to be able to stop working tomorrow? Another great question, right? If you want to retire, how much money do you need coming in? And when you say that, it's funny because their mind almost goes blank because they're thinking so far in the future. They're like, oh, I don't know. I don't think I'd need that much. And I go, okay, well, if you stop working tomorrow, how much money do you need coming in? And I usually follow that up with, do you think you need as much as you're making now? Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And that'll usually get you in a ballpark of a number that you can work with. Generally, it's about what they're making, maybe a little bit more. But that way you have at least a number to start working with. Okay, so let's actually go through this process. Here's another tidbit. Get all of the information. The FNA is specifically with all the information that we need. If you're not filling out certain boxes, it's going to be really hard to help you. We need to know what their expenses are. We need to know what their income is, their discretionary, their savings commitments. I've seen a couple of FNAs come back and they're like, I don't know how much they want to save, and I don't know when they want to retire or how much they want to retire with. I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to put an FNA together to do that when you don't have all of those pieces of the puzzle to be able to actually help them with that. So these are things that we want to make sure that we actually get all of the information on. And I'll go through this with you while we're actually doing an FNA.